St. Thomas Aquinas was mocked as a simpleton, fool, and a dumb ox. Fellow students ridiculed the shy and overweight scholar, but time would disprove them all. Aquinas would actually go on to become the most influential theologian in world history. He spent his entire life writing, studying, and seeking the face of God. Yet his theology was far more than blind faith. He took the logic of Aristotle, perhaps the greatest philosopher of the ancient world, and he merged it together with the revelation of Christianity. Aquinas' masterpiece, the Summa Theologica, has since reigned as the standard for theological works in the history of mankind. However, this video is not about Aquinas' intellect. As genius as he was, there was one thing that dwarfed his thinking, and that was his piety. Aquinas' life of study was a life of prayer, a life of seeking the truth, which led him to seek the face of God himself. And if you're to believe it, by the end of his life, Aquinas found God. Literally. He reportedly had a vision of God that was so awe-inspiring he would mysteriously abandon his life's work of study and philosophy on the spot. So without further ado, here is the life story of St. Thomas Aquinas and the path that led him to the face of God himself. Now, growing up, you wouldn't have expected Aquinas to be a master theologian. He was born to an aristocratic family who was very concerned with secular affairs, and to make matters worse, Aquinas was bullied tremendously in school growing up. He was overweight and shy, and so students were consistently making fun of him and calling him a dumb ox. Yet Aquinas was also tutored by a very famous teacher, St. Albert the Great, who had a very famous prophecy. He would famously tell his students that he believed one day the entire world, perhaps the entire history of mankind, would hear the bellows of this dumb ox. But before Aquinas would go on to change world history, before he would even become a Christian, he would first have to deal with an immense amount of trials and tribulations from none other than his family themselves. See, when Aquinas first announced that he wanted to become a priest, his family reacted with horror. Again, these were aristocrats who very much cared for secular life. They wanted their son to become, an important man, a man of the world with things to do. How much of a waste would it be if our son went to just live in piety and prayer in some monastery? They effectively tried to sabotage Aquinas at every turn and every step of the way. Most famously, his brothers actually kidnapped Aquinas. They locked him in a tower, and they didn't just try to imprison him, they tried to corrupt the man's mind, body, and soul. One time they even sent in a prostitute to try and persuade Aquinas of his ambitions. And then famously, a few minutes later, that same prostitute ran running out of the room screaming. When Aquinas' brothers looked inside, they saw him standing there by himself wielding a hot firebrand and had reportedly persuaded the prostitute to consider otherwise. Though Aquinas was diligent in his holdout, he still remained imprisoned for a little over a year before finally his mother would take pity on him and smuggle him out. And it was only then, when he was finally freed from the clutches of his family, that Aquinas would go on to pursue religious life. Specifically, Aquinas would go on to become a Dominican, which Dominicans are priests who emphasize intellectual study. For Aquinas, this would be a match made in heaven. See, Aquinas thereafter, he moved to Paris, which was the intellectual capital of Europe at the time. And so effectively, in Europe as a Dominican, Aquinas just spent every waking moment of every single day writing, studying, or seeking the face of God. He was attending to his own studies, or reading scripture, or philosophizing, or preaching and sharing the gospel in the streets. Again, Aquinas also was a big advocate of natural theology. He believed that God could be known to exist through reason with certainty by studying the created and known world. In Aquinas' masterpiece, his Summa Theologica, he effectively synthesized Aristotelian metaphysics and logic with Christian revelation to build this 3,000 plus page just behemoth of grandiosity that dares to seek the face of God in every single aspect of providence. What was perhaps most remarkable, again, was that it seemed nothing could corrupt Aquinas' piety, not even royalty itself. Aquinas once had a dinner with King Louis IX of France, and you might have expected him to be like his contemporaries who also attended the dinner. He might have expected them to be politicking a bit more or conversing with Louis and trying to impress him, but mysteriously, Aquinas remained silent the entire dinner. He was in this deep-rooted contemplation and meditation, yet spontaneously towards the end of dinner, after perhaps an hour or so, from his stupor, from his silence, reportedly screamed out, "That will teach those Manichees." The point is, Aquinas had spent his entire night lost in thought debating heresy, that not even royalty itself could come in front of Aquinas' love for study, truth, philosophy, and God. Therefore, it's only fitting that the man who spent his entire life seeking the face of God would be given the ultimate gift, namely, a visit from God himself. So what exactly did this visit look like? As the story goes, Aquinas was alone in his room, praying under the Eucharist. And then suddenly this loud voice burst out. Apparently it was loud enough that it echoed not just through Aquinas' room, but throughout the entirety of the building around him, such that all the bystanders and civilians heard this voice too. Yet the voice of God, was only addressed at Aquinas. And what God said specifically, he said, "Thomas, you have written well of me. What would you like from me?" And Aquinas' answer was perfect. He merely replied, "I would have only yourself, my Lord." So in response to Thomas's response, God gives him a vision of heaven. Aquinas is reportedly given a vision of what the real thing of heaven looks like, something that's close to the beatific vision of seeing the face of God himself. This can sound almost underwhelming at first. No, quite frankly, this reality was anything but underwhelming. In fact, for Aquinas, it was fundamentally transformative. See, this man had spent his entire life studying philosophy and studying the nature of God. Yet one glimpse of God himself made Aquinas abandon his life's work. He said, compared to heaven itself, this is straw, or BS. This is nothing compared to the real thing. But this isn't to say there isn't genius in that work, because again, if you believe the Christian story, well, his writing pleased God, so there's something there. So Aquinas spent his final days in peaceful piety and humility. Again, he never dared write another word of philosophy or theology, but he still taught and stayed devout to his faith until he passed away. I believe it was year 1274. And as far as his legacy goes, he was shortly canonized by the Catholic Church as a saint. And more importantly, his work, the Summa Theologica, has since reigned for 800 years as the greatest work of theology, specifically for its brilliance of marrying Aristotelian metaphysics and logic and reason with Christian revelation. Whether you're a believer, an atheist, or agnostic, or anywhere else in the middle, everyone agrees when you read Aquinas and take him seriously, he sharpens your mind and your rational faculties as a thinker. But what exactly is the moral takeaway of Aquinas' life story? I would say it's actually far, far richer than merely study Thomas Aquinas, although that's certainly a great start as well. No, I would say Aquinas, he really embodies the axiom that the truth will set you free. This was a man who loved truth and loved philosophy and loved reason with all of his heart. And his studies led him to Christ, which he believed was the Logos, the reason, the truth, the Word made flesh. And so even his piety, his prayers, his adoration was that of a sanctifying change of heart that brought him true joy and meaning. It didn't just make his life meaningful, but it left a life-changing legacy that has since influenced centuries and centuries of human thought and happiness. So the moral takeaway then is true for man everywhere. Again, the truth will set you free, and therefore the best way to go about approaching life is to conceptualize the highest good in reality that you can conceive of and pursue that good with all of your heart. And if you truly lay down everything out of a love for this good, this is what it means to effectively find your life by losing your life out of a love for the other, that is the true, the good, and the beautiful. So the man who loses his life out of a love for the good is the man who may just stumble onto a glory and legacy that far outlives him for his time that he spends here on earth. And that's all I've got prepared for you here today. So if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you liked, commented, and subscribed. It would go a long way in helping my channel grow. And also, if you are a Christian man of faith who's looking to get a bit more in shape, I am currently taking more clients for my faith-based fitness coaching. I'll leave a link to that below in the description. But beyond that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a blessed day, my friend. Take care.